Hey everybody, and welcome to a deep dive all about fear. You know how like when you get that feeling your heart starts to race and like your palms get all sweaty?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to get into today.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going way beyond, that whole fight or flight thing.
Yeah.
And looking at how fear can actually like really stop us from doing stuff in our lives.
Right.
We found this blog post called Trapped in Fear, The Day My Body Stopped Obeying Me. And it's about this teacher who had like a super scary allergic reaction to medication she was taking for malaria.
Wow.
But it's not just like a medical story,
No.
It really digs into how fear like takes over in our minds and like even our bodies.
Yeah. And what's super interesting here is that her fear wasn't only about like the reaction itself. She had a really bad experience with this medication before, and it gave her what we call anticipatory anxiety.
Yeah.
It's like being afraid of something that might happen even before it does. Like, when you're about to go down a huge drop on a roller coaster and your heart's already pounding like before you even start moving.
Right.
That's kind of what anticipatory anxiety is like.
And so in her case, like her anxiety was so strong that it actually started to like show up physically even before she took the new medication.
Yeah.
She talks about like uncontrollable twitching and her fingers getting all stiff and even like involuntary movements and all this just from thinking about taking it again.
That's wild.
I know.
It really shows you like how powerful that mind-body connection is.
Right.
Our thoughts and emotions can trigger actual physical responses,
Yeah.
So in her case, the fear basically sets off her body's stress response and releases all these hormones like adrenaline and cortisol.
Yeah, right.
And those hormones, they can cause all those exact physical symptoms she was dreading. The twitching and the racing heart, like all of it.
So it's like her fear is like feeding itself almost. Like
Yeah.
the more she's afraid of the medication, the more likely she is to experience these symptoms, even if the medication isn't actually causing them.
Exactly. It's this crazy cycle, this fear-anxiety feedback loop.
Wow.
The physical symptoms, they make the fear worse, and then the fear makes the physical symptoms worse. It's like the snowball rolling downhill, just picking up more snow and speed as it goes.
And then on top of all of that, her doctor's trying to reassure her and tells her the new medication should be fine. I feel like that should probably just freak her out even more.
Yeah, you're probably right. Instead of like calming her down, it probably just made her more uncertain and doubtful.
Yeah.
And her mind starts to race and she's picturing all these worst case scenarios.
Right.
She even thinks about just skipping the medication altogether, which is like a classic avoidance response when fear takes over.
It's like that flight part of fight or flight, right?
Exactly.
But instead of running away from like actual danger, she's thinking about running away from the medication itself.
Right.
So what happens next? Does she take it? Does she like run and hide?
Yeah.
Okay, so we left off with this teacher and she's facing like this huge decision. Like, does she take the medication and risk like having another one of those scary allergic reactions? Or does she like skip it and maybe put her health at risk or even like her job?
Right.
I mean, it's a really tough spot to be in.
It is. It totally is. And you know what? It's something that a lot of us can relate to.
Yeah.
Even if the stakes aren't quite as high, we've all had those moments where fear's like whispering in our ear, don't apply for that job. You're just going to get rejected.
Yeah.
Or like, don't you dare speak up in that meeting. They're going to think your idea is dumb.
Oh, totally.
Fear is like really good at being persuasive,
Yeah.
It convinces us to just play it safe, even when it means like missing out on things that could make us grow or be happier.
Right. So how did the teacher in the story like finally break free from that fear that was kind of paralyzing her?
Well, luckily she had a friend who was there for her.
Oh, it's good.
And this friend didn't do what some people might do, which is like tell her to just get over it.
Right.
Or like act like her fear wasn't real. Instead, her friend was like, I get it. This is scary. And then helped her come up with a plan.
That's so important.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything complicated. Just like take the medication in the morning and I'll be right here with you.
I mean, it sounds so simple.
Right.
But I can see how having that support would be huge.
It is. It really is. Instead of facing her fear alone, she knew someone had her back.
Exactly. It's like having someone with you when you're in like a spooky forest.
Yeah.
Like the forest is still scary, but you feel a little braver knowing you're not alone.
Right.
So, okay, she's got a friend by her side and she's ready to do this.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, the next morning, she takes this deep breath, swallows the pill, and nothing happens.
Oh.
No twitching, no stiff muscles, no scary side effects.
What?
Just this huge wave of relief.
That's kind of anticlimactic, isn't it?
It is.
I bet she was like bracing herself for the worst and then nothing.
Yeah.
It really shows how sometimes the things we're most afraid of, they don't even happen.
So true. And look, I'm not saying her fear wasn't real, because that experience she had before was definitely traumatic.
Right.
But the fact that her worst nightmare didn't happen just shows you how sometimes our minds can blow things way out of proportions. Like our brains are kind of programmed to focus on the negative,
Right.
and to expect the worst possible thing to happen. It's a survival thing, but it can also keep us trapped in this cycle of fear and avoidance.
It can. So then how do we break out of that cycle? How do we go from being controlled by fear to being more courageous?
Yeah,
Okay, so we've seen how fear can just take over sometimes.
you're right.
And how our minds can make those anxieties even worse.
Yeah.
And that avoiding stuff often doesn't really help. But let's get practical for a sec.
Right.
How do we actually break free from all that fear and start living more courageously?
The good news is we don't have to become fearless all of a sudden.
Right.
There are things we can do right now to start managing fear and building up our courage.
Okay, give me the secrets.
All right. Well, one of the most powerful tools is something called mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
It's basically about paying attention to what you're thinking and feeling right now in this moment and not judging yourself for it. So instead of getting all caught up in those what ifs and worst case scenarios,
Right.
you just notice the fear without letting it completely take over.
So it's like taking a step back from the fear almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of being in it, you're just watching it.
Yeah, you're becoming more of an observer.
I like that.
And when you do that, it gives you the chance to choose how you want to respond,
Right.
instead of just reacting automatically.
Makes sense.
It's like hitting the pause button on that whole fear response.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful.
Right.
But what about when the fear feels really physical?
Oh, yeah.
My heart's racing, my palms are all sweaty. It feels like my body's betraying me.
I know what you mean. Well, that's where breathing techniques come in.
Really?
Yeah. So when we're scared, our breathing tends to get all fast and shallow.
Right. But you can actually trick your body into calming down by consciously slowing down your breath.
Wait, seriously? Just breathing differently can change how my body reacts to fear.
It sounds too simple to be true, but it really works. When you take deep, slow breaths, it's like you're telling your nervous system, hey, we're safe here.
Oh, wow.
And that helps to dial down all those physical symptoms of fear.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've got mindfulness to notice the fear and breathing to calm our bodies down. But what about those bigger fears?
Yeah.
The ones that stop us from going after what we really want in life.
Those can feel like huge mountains to climb, right?
They do.
But remember the teacher in our story.
Yeah.
She took one little step, and it ended up helping her overcome this big fear. That's the key. Break things down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on reaching the top of the mountain, just think about taking the first step.
So instead of I'm going to write a whole novel, it's more is it a write for 30 minutes today? Exactly. That feels so much less scary, right?
It does.
And each little step you take, it builds your confidence and makes the next step a little bit easier.
Right.
You start to see that you can actually do way more than you thought you could.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love for everyone listening to think about that one fear that's been holding them back.
Yeah.
What's one tiny step, maybe even something you can do today, that would help you start facing that fear?
It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just something small.
Right.
Maybe it's sending an email or having a tough conversation or finally signing up for that class you've been putting on.
Exactly. The most important thing is to take action, even if it's just a tiny step.
Yeah. Because as we've learned, courage isn't about not having fear.
Right.
It's about moving forward even though you're scared.
And every time you do that, you get a little braver.
You got it.
Yeah.
So go out there and embrace those fears and see what incredible things you can do when you choose courage over comfort. Until next time, keep exploring.